Brock Purdy, a phenomenal season in his first as a full-time starter for the San Francisco 49ers. An all-time season. Is he already an all-time quarterback? Where does he rank amongst all-time quarterbacks? And why it's pretty darn high already on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love our everydayers. We love it even more when those everydayers hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting quite like we want them to. So this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Croc. When's the last time? I've got the list up right now. When's the last time you looked at all-time passing leaders for the San Francisco 49ers?
I'm not sure I ever have. I think I did pay attention to the single season passing leader.
We looked at that and referenced it quite a bit last year because of what Brock Purdy was doing in 2023.
And when Jimmy Garoppolo was close to it. So that's when I was first really kind of made aware.
And the 49ers have never been a super high volume, high level passing team, right? And even though they've had great quarterbacks, it hasn't been all about volume and just number of passing yards in a season or even in a career. But if you had to guess, where do you think Brock Purdy career, we're talking 49ers career passing yards. He's played a season and a half of NFL football. 21 games is what Brock Purdy has played. Well, 25 total games, 21 as a starter in the regular season. Where do you think Brock Purdy ranks with his 5,654 career passing yards in all-time 49ers history?
Well, he's definitely over Ken Dorsey. I'm assuming he's over Tim Rattay.
Yep.
We had
J.T. O'Sullivan. He's cleared him. J.T. O'Sullivan's 24 overall.
Wow. Okay, I'll throw a number out there and I would say 12th.
Woo, you're close. He's 11. He just passed Steve Spurrier, who was 12th or was 11th, now is 12th on the all-time passing list for the 49ers. Brock Purdy's 5,654 passing yards has him 11th all-time, and he started one full season for the 49ers. So that surprised me. I mean, I know that there's been a few long-time quarterbacks, so maybe a lot of quarterbacks haven't had a chance to start for multiple seasons and get those sort of numbers up there. Brock Purdy is top 10 in passing touchdowns with 44. He is number 10 overall. Got even more than Steve DeBerg's 37, even though Steve DeBerg is ahead of him in passing yards. Steve DeBerg, the last guy who started games before Joe Montana started. All right, Croc, let's get it out of the way at the top. I think this is an argument that we have to have, and some 49ers fans, depending on your age, might argue about who the greatest quarterback in franchise history is. For me, it's Joe Montana. I saw him first. I saw both Montana. Didn't quite see the beginning of Montana's career, but I saw the late 80s of Joe Montana. I really became a true fan in like 89, and it was like San Francisco 49ers are in the Super Bowl. San Francisco Giants are in the World Series, and it was easy. My family was already Giants and 49ers fans and fans of the San Francisco teams, but how could you not, as a kid, jump all the way on board with those two franchises? And that's why I was like so easily enthralled by San Francisco sports, especially baseball and football, with the 49ers and the Giants. And Joe Montana was the guy, and he was larger than life. And Steve Young was great, but Montana's got the rings. And as great as Steve Young was, Montana was the original for me, and his numbers are better as a 49ers quarterback. So Joe Montana, the guy for me, number one. Do you argue with that? Because I know you've seen a lot more Young than Montana in your life.
Definitely saw a lot more Steve Young, but I just from a historical standpoint, I don't think there's any way you can argue with that. A guy who has 4 Super Bowls for one franchise, Cool Joe earned that nickname, just being able to play under pressure, and a really big part of turning this team around and the fortunes to where it's got to where it was when Steve Young took over. So I think you definitely have to go with him as kind of the pioneer, the guy that really started this thing, set this 49ers organization up for the next couple of decades.
And Steve Joe Montana's career started slower than Brock Purdy's too. Like at this point in Joe Montana's career, he was going into his third season, which was that first big season as the full-time true starter. 49ers went to the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl 81 season, went 13-3. Before that, he had only started a handful of games, 6-7 games over the course of his first 2 NFL seasons. So Brock Purdy's already ahead of the way he started his career versus the great Joe Montana. And then at the end of Joe Montana's career with the 49ers, in 91, he missed the entire season, only 1 game in 92. So he missed 2 years. So really 81 to 90, 10 full seasons were the bulk of Joe Montana's career as a 49er. When we reference his all-time stats, it's really just exactly a decade, 10 years through the 80s, 81 through 1990. Then obviously he left the 49ers for the last couple of years of his career, went to the Kansas City Chiefs in 93 and 94. But Montana, when you look at the all-time numbers, most passing yards, most touchdowns, he's the greatest quarterback of all time in franchise history, and was one of the great all-time quarterbacks in the NFL before Tom Brady came along and start winning more Super Bowls than Joe Montana did. Joe Montana is unbelievable. He's number 1. Steve Young's number 2. The question becomes, where do you start to legitimately talk about Brock Purdy? Now, he's not even top 10 in passing yards. He's had 1 full season as a starter, but the question starts to become, okay, if we're drafting these quarterbacks, where would you take Brock Purdy and the rest of his career being unknown versus some of the careers we already know from like old-timey, but still Hall of Fame type players, guys that won MVPs in the league, like John Brodie, who we never saw, YA Tittle, who we never saw. And then there was other quarterbacks that just played longer and had more statistics, who also lost Super Bowls, right? Like Colin Kaepernick and Jimmy Garoppolo. Alex Smith is number 6 all-time in passing yards for the San Francisco 49ers. Jeff Garcia is number 4 all-time in passing for the San Francisco 49ers. So at what point do you start talking about Brock Purdy?
So are we looking at it through the eyes of, if there were a quarterback draft with the 49ers, what order would these guys go in? So you said right. First is Joe Montana. He's going to come off the board. He's essentially the first overall pick. Then second, you got Steve Young. And then what guys would be picked next?
Yeah, so it's like you're drafting all these guys at 24 years old. They're all 24 in 2024. They were all born in like 1999 or whatever, 2000.
Okay, and am I drafting them to whatever version of the 49ers roster I want to put them in? So let's say, the 1994 Niners with the loaded defense and offense, and I'm drafting this quarterback to play in that offense?
Sure.
For this hypothetical exercise.
They play different eras, so you can kind of play with it however you want. You can let your mind run wild on what these guys are and what their career means and how good they are and what you think they're going to do, because nobody, Joe Montana included, has done what Brock Purdy has done yet. And he had one of the great seasons in 49ers history last year, but he's done it for 1 full season plus part of his rookie year. And so there's no way he can compete with these guys when you start talking about career numbers. So if you're just talking about, career numbers, you're talking about the Garcias and the Kaepernicks and a lot of these guys clearly over Brock Purdy. And when I'm looking at great quarterbacks, I would take Brock Purdy over those guys.
I'm taking Colin Kaepernick third.
You're taking Kaepernick third after Steve Young?
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna differ a lot, because even though I didn't watch them play, I'm not gonna bypass MVPs, Hall of Famers, John Brodie.
Oh, okay, my bad. I can't even speak to those guys though. I don't even know. I can't even tell you what race they are. Like I don't even know. I again, even as a 49er fan, I've seen some things of certain guys and certain stats, and I've seen their names on lists, but I couldn't tell you what it looked like with them throwing the pass. And I don't know if that makes me a bad 49er, co-host. I don't know if that makes me a bad 49er, but like, I just don't go. I stop at Joe Montana. And I've talked about on here. Like, first of all, guys, listen. And there's a lot of listeners that I know are longtime 49er fans. They comment to us on social media. They've been a 49er fan longer than I've been born. I was born in 1987. Okay. So now, even though I was born in 87, we started talking about Super Bowls and things like this. I was what? In the 94 Super Bowl, 9 years old, 8 years old. Like, I was very young, even in the 94 Super Bowl with Steve Young. And it wasn't until like maybe a couple years after that, which I did. I mean, I watched a lot of sports when I was young, but really, truly being able to grasp the magnitude of how good someone was. I've talked about it. Like, Terrell Owens was kind of my guy, because I saw like a very good Jerry Rice, but kind of an older Jerry Rice, where all of a sudden it's like this T.O. guy, I'm 9 years old or whatever, and Terrell Owens starts to come into his own. So like, that was really more of my era. So it's really me having a lot of respect for Joe Montana. But past Montana, a guy who I do not remember watching one game in a 49er football, it's hard for me to talk about the other guys.
Okay, well, we've got to do justice. Probably not the justice they deserve, but I want to go down not my memory, but memory lane for some folks. I'm talking about John Brodie. I'm talking about YA Tittle, and why it's disrespectful to start talking about anybody over those guys in the top 5. But once we get past them, Croc, then I think we got to get serious about where Brock Purdy ranks in this, with the Garoppolos and the Kaepernicks and the Jeff Garcias. I think that's where it gets very difficult to start to rank this if we're trying to pick who we think are going to be the great 49ers all-timers. Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. Comparison is a thief of joy, and it's easy to envy what's going on in other people's lives. When we were talking about social media, plays a big part in that for people, and I think to the detriment of a lot of people. And what you see is a curated existence of some folks, and you're trying to hold yourself to that standard. It's not even really what's going on in their life, and it might look like they have it all together on their Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. And therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your specific schedule. All you do is you fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched to a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today. Get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So we've had this conversation before, Croc. It was a couple years ago, the last time we had the conversation, because we did our all-time 49ers draft, right, with Wink, and we had 3 different teams. And when it comes to the 49ers, clearly the first 2 quarterbacks off the board are going to be Montana and Young. And I had the 3rd pick in that draft. So it went Montana, Young, and then I went Jerry Rice, because I knew you guys weren't going to go quarterback at that point. My quarterback ended up being John Brodie. And I think John Brodie is such a clear number 3 for the San Francisco 49ers. And he was doing things in 1965 that a lot of quarterbacks weren't doing. He was throwing for 3,000 yards. He was completing 61.9% of his passes, 30 touchdowns. And he was slinging the rock like a lot of people weren't. He was Offensive Player of the Year, AP, that year. He was an MVP a few years later, 1970. He won the MVP award for the 49ers. And he is still, even in a past era where they ran the ball a lot, he's still number 2, ahead of Steve Young, all-time in career passing yards for the 49ers. Young's just behind him in passing yards, and Young is just ahead of him in passing touchdowns. So
okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I have to ask this question.
Okay.
Again, this is a lot of educating going on with me. Comments, please take it easy on me here. I'm just a little young, a little ignorant as it pertains to those guys. But if what you just said is factual, how is this guy behind Steve Young?
Oh, so you're trying to argue because, okay.
We're talking about errors. We're talking about, did you just say he had a season where he threw 30 touchdowns?
Yeah, he had 3,000 passing yards, 30 touchdowns, and 61.9% completion percentage. To that point in the NFL history, that kind of stuff wasn't happening.
Right. So we're talking about somebody who was a transcending quarterback in the 60s, you know, player of the year, MVP, and doing things that, you know, what was it, 30 years later, Steve Young is like, oh, let me try to break John Brodie's passing touchdown record. That's what it sounds like. Like, that is kind of crazy. And doing it in an era where obviously still a lot of running going on, but 49ers, you know, very out in front of throwing the ball more. There was one year where Jerry Rice had 22 touchdown catches in 12 games and like didn't play a lot of games because of a short season. That might be the year I was born when that happened. But what you just said, I feel like the degree of difficulty to do it in his era might have been a little bit more difficult, or at least you weren't seeing that. So yeah, it feels like he should actually be even a little bit higher than Young.
Young won a Super Bowl. Young more MVPs. So Young was better, but shorter amount of time. Because if we're talking about drafting these guys at 24, Steve Young wasn't even good until he was 30. Right? Because he went like USFL, the LA Express, was it? Obviously the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, then failed out there and he was a reclamation project for Bill Walsh and the San Francisco 49ers. So it took him a long time. John Brodie was the number 3 pick in the draft. He was a first rounder in 1957, went to Stanford. I mean, he's a Bay Area legend too. John Brodie doesn't get talked about enough. Oakland Tech High School, Stanford, and then San Francisco 49ers first round pick and MVP for the 49ers at quarterback. So like, that's the type of player we're talking about here with John Brodie. And so to me, you can't even penetrate the top 3. It's Montana, Young, Brodie for me for the 49ers. And now YA Tittle's a Hall of Fame guy as well, but his career was kind of split up with the 49ers, and then he went to the New York Giants, and I think he got more acclaim with the New York Giants that he did with the San Francisco 49ers, but he's still top 5 all-time in passing yards for the Niners as well, with 16,000 passing yards. And he was the quarterback before Brodie from 51 to 1960. So, yeah, the 49ers lineage of quarterbacks is crazy, and it goes all the way back to 1951 with YA Tittle.
Wow, so you went Tittle, Brodie, and then eventually it was Joe Montana and then Steve Young.
Yeah, so Brodie's last year was 73. Montana was drafted in 79. So there was a little bit of lull of 5-6 years there, and the Niners were not great in that late 70s era. And then Bill Walsh showed up, drafted Joe Montana in 1981. They were off.
It's pretty cool. Yeah. Cool backstory right there. I gotta watch some NFL films on Tittle and Brodie.
Yeah, and Tittle was ahead of his time too, as far as slinging the rock. So like this, you know, the West Coast offense I know started with Bill Walsh and Joe Montana, but the San Francisco 49ers franchise was slinging it compared to some teams for a long time, since way back.
You know, the first time I heard YA Tittle's name, it was it was like a commercial on ESPN about some kind of trivia thing that ESPN had, and the guy was like, the answer to whatever the question was YA Tittle. He was a quarterback, and they said the thing, and I'm like, who the hell is YA Tittle?
Great name though, a Hall of Fame name as well as a Hall of Fame career. YA Tittle. The thing I think of with YA Tittle is seeing photos of him, and it was like later career YA Tittle, and he's like bald, got a cul-de-sac. He's like, I might have a cigarette in his mouth or something. He looks so old, and he was probably 38. And he looks 20 years older than Tom Brady does right now. And he was playing NFL football. He looked so old. And a lot of these old players did look more grizzled than some of the guys do now. And obviously it wasn't as high paying of a gig back then as it was now either. These guys were manual labor practically, half manual labor, half entertainers with their pro football careers. But yeah, YA Tittle, an all-time great. It's got to be on the list. And to be honest with you, I think I would still argue for him at 4. But I know you want to make the argument for Colin Kaepernick, right? So,
well, no, I'm not. When it makes making the argument for Cap, that's not like a huge thing, because it's very clear who the now top 3 guys are. Then you throw in Tittle. Then I think that at least there's a conversation about either a guy you would take or why you would take him. Why would you prefer this guy over that? Or what makes these guys different? Or, hey, why should it be Brock Purdy? And, I think I'm just opening up the conversation and maybe looking at it from maybe a different perspective than others. And I don't think that no matter which route you go after the guys that we just mentioned, I think you'd be fine and have a terrific quarterback. But for me, there's certain things that I say, you know what? If you're giving me this kind of team, certain guys that I prefer as far as ranking them. So I can't wait to get into that.
Next, Cap, Purdy, Jimmy G. About Jeff Garcia. Let's rank him out. San Francisco 49ers all-time quarterbacks. Next. This episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And, I love sports. Croc loves sports. I know all the listeners love sports. That's why you listen to this podcast. And you never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down in the NBA and, NBA draft is over now, NHL season is over, playoffs are over, that draft's happened. The sports aren't sporting quite like we want them to. But FanDuel lets us keep going. And the sports never stop with FanDuel. Whenever you want, it's right there for you. All you have to do, open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood, whether it's Major League Baseball every single day or tons, and I mean tons of NFL bets for the 2024 season. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long at FanDuel. Just head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so I'm writing in Tittle at 4. Let's talk about 5. Let's talk about the top 5 now all time. The Hall of Famers are out of the way. There's no more MVPs on the list. There's no more Super Bowl winners on the list, Croc. 5th, Garcia, Kaepernick, Garoppolo, or is this where you put Brock Purdy with what he's done? Because he did something that none of those guys we've mentioned that would be number 5 have done. So how much do you weigh that? And one of the things that I think is important when I'm talking about all-time players in their sport, the only thing you can go by is how good they were versus their peers. And so that's why I think when you start talking about Brodie, start talking about Tittle, Montana and Young, those guys were better than their peers. Jimmy Garoppolo, it wasn't like he was lapping his peers, even though his numbers look good compared to some older players, right? But Colin Kaepernick, some of the things he was doing, he was literally with his legs lapping some of his peers with what he could do on the ground. And he was doing things out of the pistol that people weren't doing in the NFL at the time.
So, obviously when we first started this conversation, I started throwing Kaepernick into the mix. I'm thinking about what I felt when Kaepernick was at quarterback with the 49ers, at least in the couple years that they were, obviously a really good team. And then it tapered off after that, whether it was just the roster or maybe people caught up to the style of play, whatever it was. But if we're taking peak player of all of these guys and like what's the best version of them and putting them on a terrific team, Kaepernick was a problem. And we've talked about game planning for someone like when it went into 49er game plan, like it's an art. Got San Francisco 49ers this week. All right, you're sitting in that defensive meeting. They got a big circle around number 7. How are we going to defend this guy this week? And whether it was things, hey, let's try to make him throw this or throw that, whatever. He wasn't the most precise passer, but he was an explosive passer. And he showed that in several games and several big moments. And then we also know that he was a game changer with his legs. The pressure that this guy put on defense. I watched this touchdown throw to Vernon Davis against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He threw it like 70 yards. I could be exaggerating, but 60 yards just on a frozen rope. The momentum of the ball carried Vernon Davis into a wall and gave him a concussion, right? Like this is a guy that had a special bazooka. Maybe they know how to take off, a little bit of that power from his throws, but just going into a game, the game plan, the things he was able to do in his best years, the things he was able to do, it was, I thought, special for that moment. And even at times when he played the Legion of Boom, right, and what they were, I mean, that was just, I mean, they were dominating a lot of opposing offenses. And watching him just really go toe-to-toe, blow for blow, have this crazy, like, oh, I'm falling back, throw touchdown to Anquan Bolden right over the outstretched fingers of a defender into Bolden's hands, and but also have like 100 and something yards on the ground and against a team that was hard to throw against. I thought he a lot of times did some really, really high-end ability things. And unfortunately, the team unraveled. They had a lot of controversial stuff going on in 2014. I think everybody on that roster felt that. After that season, it was a mass exodus. They lost any and everybody that mattered to that team. And the last time we saw him, he was throwing to a guy named, I don't even remember the guy's names, to be honest, and handing the ball off to Sean Drawn or somebody. So didn't end great. But if we're talking about when he took over, and really that kind of that year and a half between taking over, going to a Super Bowl, and then the next year going to a conference championship, it was some really special football being played by Colin Kaepernick in the sense of his impact on the game.
So do you take Cap over Jeff Garcia? Because I think Jeff Garcia and, so Brock Purdy maybe had the greatest single season, regular season. The 49ers didn't win a Super Bowl to cap it off for Brock Purdy. But Brock Purdy last year, most passing yards ever for a 49ers quarterback, 4,280, 31 touchdowns, which is tied for second all time. There was 69.4% completion percentage, which was even better than Young's best season, even better than, I take that back. Young did have a 70.3 completion percentage season. Montana actually
94.
Yeah, that was 94 for Young, and Montana had one in 1989 as well. So 70.2 for Montana, which is, those things were unheard of back then. There's more guys throwing for closer to 70% now. Garoppolo, no. Kaepernick, Kaepernick, Jeff Garcia. Jeff Garcia is, by the way, fourth in franchise history passing yards. Like he was chucking it. He was putting some stats up there in his 4 seasons, even though it wasn't a great 49ers team at that. Jeff Garcia was at the helm, but Jeff Garcia is number 4 all time in passing yards for the 49ers and second most now, just passed by Purdy, seasonal output of 4,278 passing yards.
I think that was a big part of it for Garcia, right? Like a team that, especially that first year that he took over, like they were not good. Obviously, they weren't expecting to have to play so many games without Steve Young at quarterback, but Garcia was playing on some teams. They weren't doing well. He was throwing the ball a lot, coming from like the Canadian Football League. And I felt like a lot of it was kind of giving him like this on the fly experience, even though he came in as like this older guy to the 49ers. And even after that, I remember some moments, and I love my moments. I love thinking about the New York Giants come from behind victory in the postseason. Like that was just a special moment for my childhood, and watching, what Terrell Owens did in that game. But Jeff Garcia was equally as impressive. And then just not much else, like not much other like big moments outside of him feuding with Terrell Owens.
I'm with you on that. So I already wrote it down. Montana, Young, Brodie, Tittle, Kaepernick 5, Garcia 6. And then
it is hard to put Garcia over Brock Purdy for me.
You have to put him over Brock Purdy, you say?
No, it's hard to put Garcia over Brock.
I wrote down Brock Purdy 7 and Alex Smith 8. That's what I have right now for the top 8.
Alex Smith definitely 8. And it's not his fault. Like you come to see, that's the other part of this too. Like some of these teams that these guys had to play on, especially when you're comparing them. Like, did anybody no, Steve Young. Steve Young probably had it the best, where it's like, I'm taking over as the 49ers quarterback and what was around him. Young probably had it the best. And then Brock probably second best, just in the sense of, wow, this is the team and the offensive guys. Because even Garcia was like, I got Steve Mariucci, right? Mariucci was cool. I like Matter of fact, I ran into him one time. I was working at Target. This was before I went back to junior college, and this lady asked me. She said, "Hey, can you help that?" I was living in San Jose, working in Campbell at the Target in Campbell, and this lady, I was like 20 years old at this time, 21. She said, "Hey, can you help this guy over here? He's looking for this movie." And she's like, "The gentleman right there with the blue shirt." I'm like, "Okay." So I go up to the guy, "Sir, can I help you find this movie?" And he turned around, and I'm like, "Mariucci?" And he looks at me with his piercing blue eyes, and he's like, settle down, right? So I like Mariucci, man. Cool dude. We had a great 10-second interaction. Yeah. But as a coach, it was a little weird. It got a little weird, got a little interesting. If we're talking about like just the like great situation, it's Steve Young. And then, because you can't even say the team that Montana took over. Like, it wasn't like, oh, just all great. Then he got the other guys. He got the Jerry Rice. Then he got the John Taylor and these guys. Steve Young took over a great, hey, we're rocking it. We're ready to roll. Let's go. Then you go get Dion and all these guys. Brock, probably second, where it's like you take over a team. It's like, hey, we got top 5 defense every year. I have a great offensive-minded coach. I have just the best weapon. Someone was talking about targets and how the 49ers, they don't have to throw the ball to Brad Ayuk a lot, and they don't. And it's like, to have the luxury to not have to throw the ball to Ayuk every time. And then and Alex Smith coming into the NFL, and he's like, well, okay, let me throw the Arnaz Battle and Brandon Lloyd, who really wants to be a rapper and not even sure he wants to play football. And you know, it's like just not great situation. So that's the hard part with this conversation as well. And this is not a fault of Brock at all, but just when you're ranking guys and Alex Smith just getting pummeled, probably the worst rookie year ever, like 1 touchdown pass, 11 interceptions. Like, it was not great, but his team was just so bad.
20 years old. He was a redshirt sophomore coming out of school too. It was like, he was so unprepared for the NFL. It's so young. And I think Alex Smith would look really good in a Shanahan offense. And I think he'd look as good or better than Jimmy G.
If you just said, all right, we're going to draft this quarterback, this team, right? Let's say instead of Trey Lance, who just needed way more time, they drafted Alex Smith, this 6'4" guy, good, solid arm, not great or anything like that. Really good mobility. He coming out of Utah, he was very mobile. And it's like, all right, this is gonna be your running back. It's like Christian McCaffrey by the time you start, and you got this guy named Deebo Samuel. You got this guy named George Kittle, who's been the first team All-Pro, and Deebo's been All-Pro. And then you have instead of whoever the hell they had protecting him when he was getting beat up in 2005, instead of that offensive line, you got this guy Trent Williams protecting your blind side, and then you have a number 1 defense instead of some of the worst defenses. Like, how much better would Alex Smith have been? Unfortunately, we don't know, so we got to go with Brock Purdy.
and one thing Brock Purdy has that Alex Smith doesn't is a little bit more of a killer instinct, a playmaker ability. Alex Smith was always afraid to be a playmaker. Was his early career, did that hurt him in that ability? But Brock Purdy will make some throws that Alex Smith would never, and even in his later career, wouldn't really attempt. He was very much because a lot of people want to say that Brock Purdy, because he doesn't have a big arm, was a check down type of quarterback. He's not. Alex Smith was a check down quarterback.
He was the epitome of a check down quarterback. But even in his best years with the 49ers, and he only had like a year and a half of quote unquote best years.
Yeah.
Did he have to kind of be? I mean, he went to a conference championship game with a guy named Brett Swain as a starting receiver. Who is Brett Swain?
Yeah. So that's the list. Montana, Young, Brodie, Tittle, Kaepernick, Garcia, Brock Purdy. One more season for Brock Purdy, and he's already top 5 for me.
One more
Garcia, he passes up Kaepernick if he does what he did last year again.
100%.
And that's only 2 seasons as a starter. I don't care.
And this part, okay, between his resume, right, Cap's resume, right now, in the sense of just the result, right, that part is similar. They both took over midseason. They both played very well during that time. The next year, they both played very well. Cap was still, kind of on his high horse. Had a slow start, I feel like one of those years, but ended up, you start rattling off a bunch of wins. He's playing a high level. People are like, damn, Kaepernick's kind of tough to stop. Now, if you're looking for more efficiency, obviously you go with Brock as a thrower. If you're looking for more playmaker, you probably go with Cap. But next year, when that time comes and Brock continues to do this, I don't think there's any way you continue to have Cap over him. But Cap will probably say, well, what if instead of everything going on around me in those years and, having Greg Roman as my offensive coordinator, what if I had somebody else? Like, would I have been better? It's like, hey, we don't know, but we know what Brock is, and he's playing lights out.
It's crazy that we're talking about like Steve DeBerg and who started for 3 years in the worst circumstances early on, like before, and then once right when Bill Walsh arrived, before Joe Montana took over. Steve Spurrier, Nick Mullins is 13 all time in passing yards. Tim Rattay, Sean Hill, CJ Beathard, Jim Plunkett even came and played for the 49ers, 76, 77. Pre-Bill Walsh. You got Elvis Gerbach. You got Steve Bono. You got Ken Dorsey. You got JT O'Sullivan. The 49ers drafted Trey Lance number 3 overall. He's not even top anything.
Trey played 4 games for him.
Trey Lance, let's see. Trey Lance. Terry Kirby is 65th. He's got 52 passing yards. Where's Trey Lance? I can't even find him.
We need a 30 for 30 for the whole like I hope in 15 years we get an ESPN 30 for 30 just the botched trade.
Yeah, everything. Yes, we need all of it because there's so much we don't know still.
I want to know details on the call to the Packers the night before the draft. I want to know about when they traded up to 3, but not knowing what quarterback, but we like Mac Jones, and everybody's saying it's supposed to be Mac Jones, and then they start to kind of change their tune closer you get to the draft. Like, then you take Trey Lance, but you didn't like Justin Fields at all. I want to know everything that happened during that time and how this guy from Iowa State came in and capitalized on the opportunity and kicked out the number 3 overall pick who played 4 games for you. That will be a sweet ESPN 30 for 30.
Oh, no doubt. Trey Lance, by the way, just behind Troy Smith, 29, Trent Dilfer, 30th all time. And then you go down a couple more spots. Trey Lance, 33rd all time passing yards, 797 career passing yards for the San Francisco 49ers. Thanks, everybody, for making this your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Croc and I back tomorrow. Winky Wednesday style right here. Locked On 49ers.